Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning. This is Joanne Lee. I'm the Director of Consulting Services at Community Vision. And this morning we will be talking about the San Francisco Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative. This is an application information session to tell you about the eligibility requirements for the program and an overview about the program. The presenting with me today is Karen Sullivan, our Managing Real Estate Consultant. The Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative is a program that is funded by San Francisco's Office of Economic and Workforce Development. It's in partnership with the San Francisco Arts Commission and the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. It was launched in 2015 and has been running the last couple of years. This program provides financial assistance, technical assistance, and other professional services and tools to help stabilize nonprofits with their real estate, who are nonprofits that are at risk of displacement and or to help them overcome barriers to growth. So our agenda this morning includes this introduction, a quick overview about Community Vision, an overview about the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative program, and then the two programs that are within that initiative, the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund, as well as the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Program. And then we will have time for your questions. So Community Vision, we are also a nonprofit organization, and we work with nonprofits to help them promote economic justice and alleviate poverty by providing financial tools and resources to them. So we have a lending department that provides loans to nonprofits for affordable housing and community facilities and working capital. The consulting services we will talk about in a second. That is where the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative is housed. We also have a program for policy, and we are a socially responsible investment vehicle for corporations as well as individuals to invest into our loan fund. In our consulting services, we provide both financial management and real estate consulting services, helping organizations understand their financial position and their business model, as well as preparing for a real estate transaction, helping organizations understand their capacity for debt, for decision-making around leasing versus buying, understanding how much space they need and what they can afford. We also help structure new market tax credit financing for some of the larger developments. So again, the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative was launched in 2015, helping to help nonprofits secure new nonprofit-owned space and create solutions for organizations seeking long-term leases. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen to talk a little bit more about the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative.
So thanks, Joanne. So the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative, on this slide, we have an overview of the impact to date. So there are two different programs within the initiative. The Nonprofit Space Investment Fund provides grants for organizations that are acquiring buildings. Through that program to date, we've awarded $4.5 million in grants to 7 nonprofits to acquire a little close to about 74,000 square feet of new nonprofit-owned space. Under the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Program, we also have a grant-making program that provides grants to organizations that are entering into leases with terms of 3 years or more. Through that program, we've awarded 1.5 million to 29 nonprofits who were able to occupy about 137,000 square feet of commercial space. In the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Program, we also offer technical assistance services to organizations that are either at risk of displacement or facing barriers to growth. And through that program, we've worked with 44 organizations that are based in San Francisco. So in order to be eligible for any of the programs within the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative, on this slide, we have the real baseline eligibility requirements for each of the programs. So in order to apply, you either need to be a 501c3 nonprofit organization or a fiscally sponsored project. You need to be located in San Francisco, and the property that you are seeking funding for also has to be located in San Francisco, and you need to have a track record of serving low-income and historically underserved communities for at least the past 3 years. So here we have an overview of the 2 programs within the Nonprofit Sustainability Initiative and the different services that can be offered through each program. So I'm going to start talking about the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund. As I mentioned, this program provides funding exclusively for acquisition, and it supports the acquisition of new nonprofit space. And so in order to be eligible for this program, you do need to have an acquisition project that you are fairly close to being able to transact on. So at the time of application, the applications are due October 1st. And when the application is submitted, you need to have either a fully executed letter of intent or purchase and sale agreement with an owner of a property that outlines the terms for the acquisition. If you have already purchased a property and that purchase happened within the last 12 months, you could also be eligible to apply for an acquisition grant. And in that instance, the deed of trust would be the documentation that you would, or the grant deed for the property would be the documentation that you would provide with your application. If you have not already purchased the property, in the application, you need to demonstrate that the acquisition will be able to close by June 30th, 2020. So as I mentioned, we're really looking for here to fund projects that are going to be transacting in the relatively short term and also have other funding sources and are looking for that last bit of gap financing that's going to make this project happen. In this round, for the acquisition pool, we'll have a minimum of $2.4 million available, and the application deadline is 12 o'clock noon on October 1st, 2019. In the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Fund, these services are really geared towards organizations that are entering into leases. So in terms of the financial assistance or grant-making program, those applications are now available. Grants are available to organizations that are entering into a lease or have already entered into a lease since September 1st, 2018, with a term of 3 years or more. At the time of application on October 1st, as part of the application, you do need to submit a fully executed letter of intent between the nonprofit and the owner of the property outlining the terms of the lease. If you've already entered into a lease, the documentation that you would provide would be the fully executed lease, and that lease would need to be effective on or after September 1st, 2018, and have a term of 3 years or more. In this round, we have a minimum of $500,000 available through this program. A little later, Joanne's going to talk about a little in more detail about the grant program and the size of grants that organizations may be eligible for, but the maximum grant amount is $75,000. The application deadline for these grants is the same as the deadline for the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund, October 1st at 12 o'clock noon. And then under the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Program, we also provide technical assistance services to organizations that are at risk of displacement or facing barriers to growth. We define displacement as an organization that has a lease that is terminating within the next 18 months. Applications for this program are accepted on a rolling basis and are generally approved within about 45 days. So if this is a program that you think you may be interested in, you can really apply whenever it works for your organization. Joanne will talk more in some later slides about the different services that are offered through this program, but in summary, your organization is paired with a consultant at NCCLF, and we define a scope of services that can help you address your real estate issues and find a real estate solution for your organization that helps build stability. Okay, so to start, we're going to talk about, in a little more detail, about the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund and the financial assistance program offered through the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Program. So for each of those programs, when applications are reviewed, priority is really given to applicants that are able to address alignment with the 5 program priorities. And on this slide, we have a summary of the 5 program priorities. In the program guidelines that are available on our website, there is a lot more information about the different documentation that can be provided to show alignment with these priorities, and we really encourage organizations to take a look at those guidelines and what documentation can be provided to demonstrate your alignment with these priorities. When applications are submitted, they are reviewed by a selection committee, and the selection committee's review really focuses on the organization's ability to address these program priorities. So this is a real core component of both the application and the application review process. So I'm going to go into more detail on the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund, and then Joanne will be talking more about the Space Stabilization Program. So in the acquisition program, there, as I mentioned, there's a minimum of $2.4 million available in this round. Grants are sized based on the lesser of $1 million or 25% of the acquisition cost. So for instance, if you were thinking about an acquisition, a property acquisition, and the acquisition cost was $2 million, you could be eligible for a grant of up to $500,000. If you are looking at an acquisition of a building for $4 million, then you could be eligible for a grant of up to $1 million. In terms of program requirements, in addition to those baseline requirements that we previously discussed, which would be having a letter of intent, grant deed, or purchase and sale agreement at the time of application. Some other requirements for the program: the grant proceeds do need to be dispersed by June 30th, 2020. And so the property, you need to be able to close escrow on the acquisition by June 30th, 2020. And when the selection committee is reviewing applications, this is one of the components of their review. They're really looking at the project readiness and the ability of the organization to transact on the acquisition by this deadline. Another thing to keep in mind is that only for the acquisition grants, there is a 30-year compliance period. And in order to enforce this compliance period, we do require that a deed of trust and use restriction be recorded on the property when the grant proceeds are dispersed. This is definitely something to talk about with your leadership team and your boards of directors, because it does limit what can happen in the commercial space during the compliance period. So for instance, if the property were acquired and 10 years after the acquisition, your organization decided you wanted to lease some space to a for-profit, like small tech startup or something like that, that would be considered an ineligible use, and the grant would technically be in default. And so as part of the application, we do require organizations to submit a board resolution signed by the board, confirming that the board has reviewed the program guidelines and that it understands the restrictions that will be placed on the property if funding is awarded, and authorizes the organization to move forward with the application. Because the applications, it does take, it is a substantial amount of work to complete the application, and we want to make sure that when organizations apply that they are going to be able to meet all of the requirements of the grant if funding is awarded. One of the other requirements for the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund is that consultation calls need to be completed with me. The last day to schedule a call is August 30th, and calls need to be completed by September 5th. In order to schedule a call, you just need to shoot me an email. My contact information is available on our website and in this presentation. And the calls are really an opportunity for us to get a sense of the projects that are out there that are considering applying to the program, and also to talk through the different program requirements and unique components of the acquisition project to make sure that it meets all of the eligibility requirements of the program, because we want to make sure that if an organization is completing an application that that they have already thought through all of the eligibility requirements and that it's a good fit for the program. And so in terms of the selection committee review, as I mentioned, when the selection committee is reviewing an application, their first consideration is the alignment with the 5 program priorities. If your organization doesn't meet all of the 5 program priorities, it does not mean that you are ineligible to apply, but the more of those priorities that you meet, the stronger your application is going to score. The selection committee also looks at the urgency and need for this project to happen, and when they're thinking about urgency, they are looking at what the impact of this acquisition project is going to have on the organization's financial sustainability and programmatic performance. And so in the application, we ask organizations to provide a 3-year operating projection, and in that projection, you can really demonstrate the financial impact of the acquisition on your organization in terms of potentially growing operating surpluses or more sustained financial stability. And for programmatic performance, we have a few narrative questions where we ask organizations to describe how this acquisition is going to enable them to deepen their impact in the community, particularly in communities that are underserved in San Francisco. And then for urgency, the committee is also looking at the project's time frame. So does this acquisition need to happen within a certain time frame because of a displacement risk or an expansion opportunity that is really unique to this moment in time? And then the committee is also looking at project readiness and organizational capacity. And so for project readiness, things that we ask for in the application are sources and uses showing the total cost for the acquisition, and if there's going to be some sort of renovation component to the property after acquisition. We also ask organizations to provide an estimate of those expenses as well as the projected sources to finance those expenses. And so here, when the committee is looking at a sources and uses, they want to see what the status of the funding is and whether it seems likely that the organization will be able to raise these funds, place the building in service, or acquire it by the June 30th, 2020 deadline. The committee is also going to look at who is on the project team. So if it's just an acquisition of a turnkey building, maybe there's a leadership team and members of the board who have the capacity to help close the transaction. If there's going to be construction required on the building, has the organization thought about hiring a project manager? Have you started talking to architects or contractors? These people don't need to be engaged at the time of application, but we do have a narrative question where organizations can talk about what their plan is for bringing these professionals on board. If there's a capital campaign, either having a capital campaign feasibility or having a plan for engaging a capital campaign consultant, could be some other documentation that would be provided. And then we also ask for a project timeline that demonstrates the ability to close on the acquisition by June 30th, 2020. And then if there is a construction component, we would also like you to include an estimate of the timing for construction, just so that we can see what the timeline is for placing the building in service. Okay, so now we have a few examples. In this first example, an organization is planning to acquire a building for $8 million. The property needs to be renovated and construction costs are estimated at $2 million. And so the question here is, how much is the organization eligible to apply for? And the answer is $1 million. So the grant amount would be sized based on the acquisition price before any other transaction fees. And so if you were to have broker's fees or legal fees, those are not included in the acquisition price. The acquisition price would just be what you are paying for the building. And so here that amount is $8 million. 25% of $8 million is $2 million. But as I mentioned, the grants are capped at $1 million. So this organization would be eligible for a grant of $1 million. All right, in this example, an organization is in discussions to acquire a building. The owner is interested in selling, but probably wouldn't be able to finalize a letter of intent by the October 1st application deadline. Is this organization eligible to apply? And unfortunately, no. If you are not able to get a letter of intent executed by the October 1st deadline, your organization would be ineligible to apply in this round of funding. All right, and our last example here, an organization purchased a building in September 2018. The acquisition was financed with debt, equity, and a short-term bridge loan from a board member. Is this organization eligible to apply for an acquisition grant? And for this organization, the answer is yes. Because they purchased the building after June 30th, 2018, they are eligible to apply to the program. And as I mentioned in the application, instead of providing the letter of intent or purchase and sale agreement, the organization would just upload the grant deed for the property. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Joanne, who's going to talk about the space stabilization program.
Great. Thank you, Karen. So the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Program's financial assistance or grant awards are targeted for nonprofit organizations that are leasing their office or program space. There is a minimum of $500,000 available in this round, and the grant awards are based on the length of your lease. So organizations that have leases for 3 to 4 years are eligible for up to $50,000 in grants funds, and organizations with 5 or more years on a lease are eligible for up to $75,000. You must have executed your lease or your letter of intent since September 1st, 2018 or later. And again, there is a 3-year lease term minimum to be eligible for the grant funds. You must demonstrate that you were at risk of displacement or facing barriers to growth, and the grant reimbursements. So the grant funds are on a reimbursement basis for your expenses, and your final reimbursement requests are due by October 31st, 2020. So eligible uses of these funds. These funds can be used for a rent stipend, which covers the rent differential between your old rent and your new rent for up to 6 months for the displaced square footage only. You can also use your grant funds for furniture, fixtures, and equipment if you have a minimum of $10,000 for these expenses. And priority is given to organizations that are relocating or expanding their space. If you are renewing in your current space, you must demonstrate how these purchases will increase the number of employees that you can house at your location, or the number of, or how you might increase the services to the clients being served at your location. Other eligible expenses include professional services such as architectural, engineering services, or legal expenses, your staffing costs that are related to the real estate project. So we can reimburse your staff time that you might have spent looking at other spaces or your spaces to lease. We can also reimburse your staff time for negotiations with the landlords or executing your lease agreement. We can cover moving expenses and or holding costs. So your expenses for moving to your new location. Holding costs are if you are renting in 2 places at once. So your current lease may run through June 30th and your new lease may start on June 1st, while you're like painting, say, or carpeting your new office. So during that 1 month, you are carrying 2 rents for your old space and your new space. We can reimburse for one of those expenses. We can also cover tenant improvements are also eligible if you have a 5-year, 5 or greater year lease. The disbursement process. So as I said before, your grant, the grant awards are dispersed on a reimbursement process, meaning that you will have incurred the expense before we are able to provide the grant, disperse the grant funds to you. If you are bidding, if you are going to purchase any kinds of furnishings, fixtures, and equipment, or engage in any professional services, you must get 3 quotes for these services and approval from Community Vision. So as a side note, we recently changed our name from NCCLF to Community Vision. So sometimes you will still hear us or see something that says NCCLF. So we need to approve your quotes before you enter into a contract with a consultant, or approve your purchase for any kinds of furnishings, fixtures, and equipment, and before you actually purchase them. And there is information on our website about the bidding process, as well as the prevailing wage process. Because these are city funds, grant recipients must comply with the city's prevailing wage requirements if you are going to do any kinds of tenant improvements with these funds. If you are going to request for staff time reimbursement, we will need to see timesheets and payroll verification. And again, all of these forms and instructions are available on our website. For the grant review criteria for the financial assistance grants, similar to the NSIF program, the selection committee will be looking for the alignment with the 5 program priorities. The committee will also look at the length of the lease term and the options. So remember that there is a minimum of a 3-year lease in order to be eligible for any of these funds. And the extent to which the project meets an urgent need based on your project's time frame, your need for funding, and the impact on your organization's financial and programmatic performance. They will also consider your project readiness and your organizational capacity. If this is, for example, an expansion into a larger space, and you will be doing, more architectural work, and you will be needing some tenant improvements, the selection committee will want to see your project readiness, that you have the other funding that you will need to complete the project, and that you have the development team to help you complete the project. So a couple project examples, some common questions that often come up. So if an organization has an old they're currently leasing 1,000 square feet at $2,000 a month. So they're paying $2 a square foot per month, and they're entering into a new lease for 2,000 square feet leased at $4,500 a month, or $2.25 a square foot per month. The question is, what is the eligible rent stipend that this organization can apply for in this program? So the answer is that they are only eligible to receive the rent stipend for the displaced square feet, which is the 1,000 square feet that they were displaced from in their current location. So the rent stipend is calculated by taking the difference in the monthly rent and multiplying it by the square feet, the displaced square feet. So the difference in the monthly rent is 25 cents, right? $2.25 minus $2. And then the rent stipend per month is multiplied by the square footage for 250 times the 6 months. So this organization is eligible to apply for $1,500 in rent stipend. So another project example, an organization is negotiating a 2-year lease with a 1-year option to extend. Is this organization eligible to apply for a grant? Unfortunately, no. The minimum base term for eligibility for this program is 3 years, so 3 straight years, not an option. So they are not eligible to apply for grant funds. Sorry. So if an organization has a draft letter of intent from a building owner that includes a square footage, it includes the term of 4 years and the address. The owner has signed the LOI. If this nonprofit signs this LOI, will it meet the eligibility criteria? No, because in addition to the items listed above, the LOI also needs to include the price per square foot. So these are the components of an LOI that we look for to be fully executed, right? That it has the address, it has the square footage, it has the term, and it has the price, and it is signed by both the owner or the landlord as well as by the nonprofit tenant. Okay, under the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Program, we also provide technical assistance services. And this is to support organizations who are facing displacement in the next 18 months, meaning that their lease is going to expire in the next 18 months, or they're on a month-to-month lease, or they are facing barriers to growth, meaning that they may want to expand into another space in order to serve more clients. Under the Technical Assistance Program, Community Vision consultants can provide financial planning to help organizations figure out how much they can afford, some space planning to look at how much space is needed. While we are not brokers, we can help identify and evaluate potential sites on the market. We can also help develop construction budgets and timelines, look at potential funding sources, and referrals to architects and engineers. We accept applications for RTA services on a rolling basis on the website, and they are approved or declined within 45 days. So this is an overview of our application timeline, just to review the process. So for the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund that Karen spoke about, the last day for the consultation calls is August 30th in order to schedule a consultation call and to complete the call by September 5th. We will continue to answer questions through September 10th at 5 p.m. and the applications are due for both the financial assistance and the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund on October 1st at 12 noon, and there are no late submissions accepted. We target to announce the awards by December 2nd, 2019, and the TA services applications are continuing to be accepted on a rolling basis. This is the contact information for myself as well as for Karen Sullivan. Jessica Townsend, our consulting program analyst, can answer any of your questions regarding the prevailing wage and bidding requirements. And finally, we'd like to also let you know about our free online real estate services. Spaces for Good is an online real estate listing service where many landlords and owners are listing their services and are willing and interested in renting to nonprofits. So there are listings there for leases and subleases, for co-working, and for event rentals and different types of program space. There's also a set of resources available for nonprofits that are thinking about real estate projects as well as for financial planning. So there are some planning tools there, like how to select an architect or how to tour different sites. There are also some budget and financial planning templates there. And so I encourage you to take a look at our website, spacesforgood.org, for some additional resources. So with that, I thank you for joining us for this webinar. This recording and the slides will be available on our website in a couple of days. And we can also take questions at this time if anybody would like to pose a question for us. We'll stay on the line for a few more minutes. Okay, so we have a question from someone in the audience that wants to know, do you have to receive technical assistance services in order to be eligible for a grant? And the answer is no. Those questions, the two programs, while they are both administered by Community Vision, you do not have to be a TA recipient or be in the TA program in order to be eligible for the grant.
Okay, and we just got another question. This question asks, if we were to lease an old building but own a new building, are we eligible for the NSIF program? And this is a situation where I think we would want to talk about this in a little more detail in a consultation call. However, if the new building is owned and was not purchased from another nonprofit, this project would be eligible for the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund program. If an organization has other properties that it's leasing or other properties that it's owned, that does not preclude you from applying to the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund. You just need to have a new acquisition that was completed within the allowable time frame in order to apply. And so this project could be eligible.
NSSP if they're going to sublease, but yes.
And we have another question asking, are you eligible to apply if you're going to sublease under the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund program? So if your intention is to buy a building and sublease a portion of that building to another nonprofit, yes, you could still be out. That project could still be eligible for the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund. One thing to keep in mind is that the tenants that you were subleasing to would need to be nonprofit organizations, and they would need to meet the eligibility criteria. And if this question was in regards to the nonprofit space, if just to talk about this question under the context of the nonprofit space stabilization program as well, if you were entering into a lease with the intention of subleasing some of that space to another nonprofit, you would also be eligible to apply through the nonprofit space stabilization program as long as the lease had a term of 3 years or more.
And I'll just also add to that, if you are subleasing from another organization and you have a term of 3 years or more, you are eligible to apply for grant funds under the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Program, the financial assistance program. So I know there's many different ways people are subleasing to and from each other. So hopefully that covers most of the examples.
Okay, and this is another question for the Nonprofit Space Investment Fund. The question is, if we are the nonprofit that owns the building and leases to other nonprofits, are we eligible? And the answer to that is yes. Again, we would want to talk through the project in more detail on a consultation call just to make sure everything aligned with the eligibility criteria. But yes, if a nonprofit buys a building with the intent to lease to other nonprofits, the nonprofit that owns the building is eligible to apply. A consideration is that any tenants within that building would not be eligible to apply for the Nonprofit Space Stabilization Program.
All right. Thank you for joining the webinar this morning. We are going to close this webinar, and if you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Karen or to me with your questions. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.